Today we're going to talk about the media and all the ways in which media changes the way that we take in our politics, the way that things can be spun through the media, the way the media is presented to us, all the different forms of media that we have to deal with now. We'll deal with all of it in one way or another. Let's get into it. So, what is media? Media is the collection of all forms, or excuse me, what is mass media? All forms of media that communicate information to the general public. Television, print, radio, and the internet. The internet obviously includes social media, uh, news agencies. Anything on the internet is considered to be media. And mass media refers to specifically that media that can be disseminated at a large, very large audience at once. So who's in the media? There's a lot of different stakeholders in the media. There are journalists and reporters, those that actually go forth and find the stories. There are editors. Editors have the overall mission of the organization um, at their disposal. They're the ones that craft the message around the story that the journalists and reporters find. Publishers are the ones that actually put forth that media. They're the companies that employ the editors that actually shows that thing. It gives you the platform by which to actually give the story. And then producers are responsible for making that story transmissible to the public. They make it where their whole job, in essence, is to uh, make the material in the story, in the event. It's all supposed to be built to the audience that it's trying to reach, and also be moneymakers basically for the agency itself, for the publishers. Now, there's a difference between media and public relations. Public relations is the communication carried out to improve the image of companies, organizations, or candidates for office. Public relations and information and campaign materials are not neutral. They are partisan. They are legitimately trying to build up the image of the person that is actually using that material. Personnel are paid to help an individual, candidate, or organization keep positive press. Positive press is everything. To counter false narratives, to counter potential problems, you want positive press to be spun in your direction. As a media journalist, write stories to inform the public. Such stories, unless they are editorials, are to be free of bias. They are supposed to put forth stories in the most straightforward way uh, as they can in order to inform. This is not a place where an opinion is supposed to be garnered. This is just the who, what, where, when, and how without any bias. This is just the straight facts, no spin to it at all. Now, there are several different media types: television, MSNBC, CNN, Fox News. All those places have television divisions. You got the faces to them. You got the late night hosts, uh, Tucker, Hannity, Ingram, Joy Reid, Ari Melber, um, Maddow, the new one, Alex Wagner. All those people, those are all television personalities. Then you got the print media. Print media is just your brick and mortar, the HSC that you get, the USA Today that you get, the New York Times. All those things are considered print media. Now, it's also considered print media when it's published online, but it's like a PDF of a newspaper. That's still considered to be print media. The internet itself, given through websites, through the Daily Caller, or the Daily Beast, the Daily Wire, those are all examples of internet um, websites, YouTube channels, those types of things. And then you got radio. We just lost one of the worst, in my opinion, radio hosts in Rush Limbaugh. Uh, no doubt influential in the medium of radio, but the message was always very much one of hate. That's Rush Limbaugh's legacy. Um, there was what's his name? He did the rest of the story. Man, I can't remember his name. He did. He would give you a setup to a story, and then he would go, and here's the rest of the story. And it was always very Paul Harvey is his name. Paul Harvey. He would do was famous for decades of doing radio shows that informed the public in that manner. Um, there's still Sirius satellite radio, where the king of satellite radio, Howard Stern, lives. Those guys dominate the radio waves. Again, television, you have affiliate stations. Uh, those are like the WSP TVs, the Channel 2s, etc., Channel 11, Channel 5, etc., etc. The national networks, CNN, MSNBC, cable programming, which is like your sitcoms and those types of things, and then on-demand or internet subscription services, which are becoming more and more prominent. Things like Netflix, Hulu, Prime Video, movies, those types of things are all part of the on-demand or subscription service mantras. And then there's also the YouTube audiences as well. They get their news through YouTube. The internet, all you need for a presence on the internet is a URL and a server space. Politico.com is a website that you could use for political news. Social media like Twitter, Facebook, etc. Websites like Politico will push their news through those social media spheres and will push um, big current events of the day that might get you to subscribe, for example, through those mediums. Um, Social media can also take the form of just individual journalists. Um, Individual journalists, I use that term journalist there loosely, people that create memes or people that create long, rambling posts about this is the truth about gun violence in this country, or just whatever tagline they put on that. You got to deal with whether or not this is actually um, relevant information to have or not. And then you got blogs as well. Blogs, Substacks now have become more popular. They allow for more individualized pieces and especially individualized um, opinion pieces as well. Substack has become the new kind of like blog space, or it's kind of like a podcast light in a way. I think I don't really know about much about Substacks. I haven't had much of a chance to interact with them, other than content creators will put out things like newsletters, and if you subscribe, you can subscribe for like a month at a time, or a year at a time, or for lifetime access for like $20. Uh, and then every day or every week or whatever their schedule is, they put out content that is based on, the news that's going on around them, and then they give you their individual slant on it, and they give you what they consider to be an expert opinion. Like one of them that I listened to, he used to be the White House communications director under Barack Obama, and I read his. Well, I'm subscribed to. I don't. I'm not going to say that I read it. I don't commit to it that hard, but he puts out a Substack every month that gives you that view or his view from the communications department of the news. and gives the communications direction of what he would have done as White House communications director uh, for that particular story and what the spin possibly could be and how to identify it. Now, print, newspapers, magazines, journals, books, brochures and flyers, billboards and newsletters, all of these things count as print media. You still see the USA Today at airports and all over the place. Magazines like Time Magazine still does the influential people of the year. Um, the magazines had The Economist, um, The New Yorker, The Atlantic. Um, there are high-minded magazines, and then there are less. There are more lowbrow magazines that all present some kind of media. Journals, academic journals, normally are we're talking about here. They're quarterly journals, bi-yearly journals, ones that are released every 2 years. They undergo a rigorous academic process where academics from across the world can actually submit papers to these journals. And when they do, they can either be accepted with revisions or their paper can be rejected. Uh, it's a very subjective process that these journals go through and are pretty much contingent upon that person finding an issue that they studied closely and finding the right place for it, finding the right journal for it, finding the right medium to actually publish their information. And that sometimes holds a professor up from tenure, holds their careers up until they can publish. Some of them are required to publish, and journals actually charge you to can charge you up to like $2.50 a page to publish in their journal. You're not getting paid to do that; you're paying them to do it, and that's how the academic research is funded and furthered. Then, of course, there are books. Books are written all the time about any number of things. The January 6th report just came out, and you can buy any number of books that has the same content in it, but different forwards from different people of note amongst the communities, and you can get different takes on the actual events of January 6th from their eyes, along with the reports themselves. Brochures and flyers, obviously, brochures and flyers give you snippets of information like events, give you very brief glimpses into, um, give you very brief glimpses into whatever the brochure is trying to advertise for. Flyers generally try to direct you toward an event of some kind. Billboards the same way. They need to be eye-popping enough to just grab your attention and give you a quick hit of information to call for more information or to where to go look for more information. Or it can do something as simple as Jesus saves. And that's the entire message. But with billboards, you're just looking for quick hitters on the interstate. And then newsletters like the Substack that I told you about earlier. These newsletters cover all the essential information from the week and cover specifically those things that you sign up for. You can customize those newsletters to cover just the things that you want to see. There's radio, analog, digital, and subscription based. Analog radio is like your AM radio. Digital radio would be like um, I'm trying to differentiate digital and subscription radio, and I'm having a hard time doing that. Um, Digital radio would be like the websites that stream across the country. Um, Dave's top 100 that you can hear anywhere in the country at any given time. And then the subscription-based radio, like Sirius XM, where you can subscribe to individual channels that do individual things. Like you can listen to all baseball all the time. You can listen to all sports all the time. You can listen to niche things through the subscription services. Top. Sorry, I'm talking to my dog. And then, of course, the new phenomenon of podcasts. Podcasts can be found literally anywhere. Anybody can do one. You just you have to advertise your podcast in a way that there's true crime, there's politics, there's sports. I've seen a podcast about reviewing water at restaurants. Um, the podcast can cover as small a niche as possible to as wide a niche as possible and addresses multiple audiences. I'm a personal fan of the entire Dirty Mo Media podcast family. I love NASCAR, but I especially love the Earnhardt family. And that, what they're doing at Dirty Mo Media right now is phenomenal. They're bringing in drivers that host podcasts. There's Door for Clear that hosts squatters podcasts. And then, of course, there's the Dale Jr. download itself that he interviews guests from the NASCAR world, uh, and not just from NASCAR either, also from like country music stars. Chipper Jones has been in there, Stone Cold Steve Austin. He just interviews athletes and celebrities and gets their take on what their impact is with the sport of NASCAR, what their impact was with their own sports, and then also just talks about their lives, talks about what's life been like after their event as athletes, and it's really cool. But those are what podcasts can do. They get to dive down into the nitty gritty of things, and you get to really, again, just like newsletters, customize your experience. Now, functions in the media, fourth estate watchdogs. What that means is, especially with the fourth estate watchdogs, uh, Nate Silver, or not Nate Silver, there was a story that broke on the internet during the Clinton scandals with Monica Lewinsky. And I'm struggling to remember the name of the publication now because I don't want to say it wrong, but it's a very famous one. The Drudge Report, Matthew Drudge. The Drudge Report broke the Clinton scandal, broke the Clinton presidency, really. Um, the media, through Cronkite and also through the Frost Nixon tapes, with the interviews with Nixon following Watergate, um, when Frost got and sat down a one-on-one with Richard Nixon and got him, do you feel sorry for what you did or do you want to apologize? Um, that's what the fourth estate watchdog means. The media holds the elite accountable. Um, to inform and entertain, obviously, all media is not. It serves its purpose to only not just to inform, but also to entertain. Media is something that takes our minds off the mundane, takes our minds off of the uh, day-to-day problems that we have, helps us get through the day a little easier, gives us some kind of distraction. But it also can be the thing that informs us the most about our world. And the media can also serve the purpose of agenda setting. We can we can have our opinions and the things that we actually care about be shaped by the media that we're presented with. So the things that we actually care about can be seen on Facebook 24/7, and then there are other things that are going on that probably deserve just as much attention, but aren't getting the media attention, and therefore we don't care. Early history of the American press, the Revolutionary Press, united colonists against the British. You have to understand um, the Revolutionary Press didn't just unite the colonies against the British. That Revolutionary Press also united the people together in favor of the Constitution. Um, it really brought together the people, the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists, and showed the people what the delegates of those constitutional conventions were thinking and how the new government will be set up. It really had made the hard sell of government to the people. The party press area, Again, that's the Constitution and the Bill of Rights era with the Federalists versus Anti-Federalists. This is where, again, they made their case for the Constitution through those essays. Yellow journalism, sensationalism, and scandalous. Made things with Joseph Pulitzer and the New York World, a tabloid style paper that included editorial pages, cartoons, and pictures. This was the beginning of what you could now call the Facebook and Twitter phenomenon. Again, quick hitters that sensationalized important issues, scandalous issues as well, things that wouldn't necessarily draw the attention of some people, but sex sells, for example. Uh, if it bleeds, it leads. Those are things that come from this era. And then there's muckraking. Muckraking was the practice of journalism to uh, call out the worst of um, political leaders, that called out the worst of business practices and governmental practices, and really started to shine a light on um, individual business practices that were considered to be, um, or at least considered to be, antithetical to the American experiment. Now, the history of radio. News on the radio began in the 1920s with the National Broadcasting Company, or NBC, and Columbia Broadcasting System, CBS. We know them now as cable news companies, but they started with these radio companies. By 1940, over 82% of American households have a radio. Warren Harding was the first president to regularly use the radio, and FDR was one of the more famous for his fireside chats. He would use the radio to come directly into your household and speak to the American people throughout World War II and throughout the end of the Great Depression, and speak directly to those individuals and really become he brought politics into the home, made you feel at ease with things that were going on, helped ease fears over big issues that were going on in the country. And he would tell you what he was going to do. He was telling you what his plans were. And in that way, harnessed the political power of the radio and really harnessed the love of the country. Now, the first official broadcast in the United States was FDR's speech at the opening of the World Fair. The World Fair was, of course, one of the better places to have the first uh, television speech. The first television ads by President Eisenhower and Adlai Stevenson in the 1950s. That's where the "We Like Ike" or "I Like Ike" uh, ads came out. They were really good, catchy tunes that started. Like, have you ever seen Mad Men? That TV show. That TV show really made it to bones off this political era. And then the first televised presidential debate was in 1960 between John Kennedy and Richard Nixon. There's a whole lore that goes behind that debate. Those that listened on the radio said that Nixon won the debate, but those that watched on TV said that Kennedy won the debate. They were asked before the debate started if they wanted makeup. Kennedy said no. Nixon said if the kid doesn't want it, I don't want it. Kennedy, before he went on stage, got makeup. Nixon they said that he looked sweaty and clammy and just bad on television, presented badly, but he had just gotten out of the hospital from an infection from where he had closed a car door on his leg and it had caused some kind of infection. So he was fresh out of the hospital. He probably wasn't his best. And again, radio said that he presented himself better than Kennedy did, but on TV, Kennedy had the more youthful, vigorous looking appearance and won that way. Whether or not that's won the election, I'm not really sure, but that's the lore of that debate. Now, slander and libel, I'm sure you've heard these terms before. Slander is to speak false information with an intent to harm a person or entity, and then libel is to print false information with an intent to harm a person or entity. The intent part is the important part here. Slander and libel can only occur in cases where false information is presented as fact. So anytime that somebody just says something that is demonstrably false about a person, then present it to the world either through squeaking it on a TV camera or writing it in a newspaper and presenting it as a fact with no evidence, with the intent of causing harm to that person's reputation or political candidacy or whatever, that is considered to be slander or libel. That's what meets those definitions. Public figures are somewhat insulated from those laws in which the publisher or broadcaster that actually commits the offense must have shown reckless disregard, essentially saying you have to prove that they lied and you have to prove that they knew that they were lying, not that they had a reasonable expectation that the lie was not. Hold on a second. I'm sorry. My dogs are. Okay, sorry. Uh, Private individuals must show that publishers or broadcasters acted in reckless disregard or argue that the author was negligent in not making sure the information was accurate before publishing. They have a little more of a ability to sue, but they still have to meet the intent argument. Now, in terms of classified material, the United States versus the New York Times in 1971, the Supreme Court ruled that prior restraint on the media, meaning the government can prevent publication of some information. The government only generally seeks to stop a media outlet from publishing information when national security is on the line. And in the United States versus the New York Times in 1971, this is the Pentagon Papers, a leak of information of how the United States got involved in Vietnam and the scope of the war in Vietnam, which was not public knowledge, had been leaked to the New York Times. The Supreme Court argued that in this case, the government did not have a reasonable case against national security being violated if those papers were actually published. Now, revelation of troop movements and the names of undercover operatives are some of the few approved reasons for censorship. Those are generally guaranteed. And then in 2003, on the left of the picture you see is Geraldo Rivera. He was with the 101st Airborne when they invaded Iraq. He basically showed on a map that he drew in the sand where the 101st Airborne was and where they would go next. Rivera was immediately escorted out of Iraq for obvious reasons. The FCC, Communications Act of 1934, created a powerful entity to monitor the airways. The FCC has 5 total members, requires radio and television stations to apply for licenses. There's something called the equal time rule. if you give one side time, you got to give the other side equal time. And then the Miller test. Now, the Miller test is a three-pronged test that defines infinity. And there's a three-pronged test, obviously, that says whether the average person, applying contemporary community standards within the work appeals on the whole superior interests describes sexual conduct in a patently offensive way and lacks any serious literary, artistic, political, or scientific value. Essentially, what this challenged the most was that the Supreme Court decision ultimately said, I know pornography when I see it. Is what that essentially boiled down to. Now, let me check on. So, the Telecommunications Act of 1996 essentially decreased the amount of regulations that were put on the telecommunications companies and allowed things like AOL and Time Warner to buy up a lot of the communications industries and combine them a lot into it basically allowed monopolies to exist inside of the telecommunications industry, essentially, allowing multiple conglomerates to combine with themselves and no penalties under the monopoly provisions of the federal law. Media and transparency, sunshine laws mandate the federal and many state government proceedings and meeting documents be made available to the public. Sunshine laws require that the public be allowed to um, essentially be inside of open hearings or at least have access to those documents after the hearings. And then the FOIA Act of 1966 requires the executive branch of the United States government to provide information requested by citizens and was intended to increase openness in the executive branch. And of course, in '66, this is the Johnson era leading into Watergate and all those other things. It was becoming more and more. This is when the trust in government started to go away a little bit. Trust in government at this point had been very high. Um, but with Vietnam, and then Watergate, and then it just the actual trust in government eroded away. Media effects and bias. The hypodermic theory argues that information is shot into the receiver's mind and readily accepted. Um, quick hits that we're readily willing to accept. Minimal effect theory argues that honestly the media has little effect on citizens and voters. I don't believe that for a second. I believe the media has a huge effect on voters and its recency bias and also thematic framing. That has something to do with that. We'll talk about thematic framing in just a second. Cultivation theories is the hypothesized that media develops a person's view of the world representing a perceived reality, and then what we see on a regular basis is our reality. Media can then set norms for readers and viewers by choosing what is covered or discussed. It is true in a way that the world that the media presents to us is not always the world as it is. We watch the news and we perceive homelessness to be a rampant problem, but the reality is you rarely see homelessness on the streets because we do a good job either of forcing them into hiding or it's just not as big a deal as it's actually perceived to be or as it's actually shot into our minds to be. And then they can hammer that opinion of if I said homelessness is rampant in the country, a lot of you would probably say, yeah, yes, yes, it is, because the media at some point has thematically shown you repeatedly and said repeatedly that it's getting bad, it's getting worse, it's bad, it's getting worse, it's bad, it's getting worse, it's bad, it's getting worse, et cetera, et cetera. Um, Episodic writing occurs when a story focuses on isolated details or specifics rather than looking broadly at a whole issue. Episodic framing is that kind of framing where you're focusing on the one thing that fits your narrative and not looking at the narrative as a whole. So, like, the Republican Congress right now is talking about how uh, Congress is so different. Like, you're able to be here tonight to see the State of the Union. We're able to be together for the State of the Union, which is so different from the previous Congress, completely ignoring the fact that there was a pandemic going on and people were dying by the hundreds of thousands a day. And it just completely skips that whole thing to focus on, well, today we're here and that's what we should worry about. So then there's priming. Is a media coverage that disposes the viewer or reader to a specific perspective on a subject or issue. Again, homelessness or immigrants are dirty, drug users don't deserve your time, those that are on food stamps or unemployment are lazy. Those are all things that media primes us to see, and then our politicians either reinforce those narratives to us or our own experiences. Either we either match those experiences in our mind to what we see around us, or we morph the situation to make it fit what we already believe inside of our minds instead of actually going to look for those biases in our minds. Um, I'm not really going to get into this, uh, but this is the difference between the left and the right, especially. CNN was generally considered the middle ground between the two. Obviously, center left. You can see all the negative stories between Obama and Romney. Uh, MSNBC is considered far left of the media sphere. Very many positive stories about Obama, very few positive stories about Romney. And then Fox, the total opposite. More positive stories about Romney, less positive stories about Obama. That's just the bias of the three major news networks. That's their bias. And now the media's role in elections. The media plays a key role in influencing who become the Democratic and Republican nominees in presidential, gubernatorial, and congressional elections. The media, by choosing to discuss their messages, by choosing to vet their credentials or ignore their credentials, carrying so much of their speeches, and giving those broader access or not, and hosting them to conduct interviews or not, um, are all ways in which uh, the media can shift the narrative on candidates. Candidates with the most media coverage obviously build momentum and do well in the first few primaries and caucuses, and generally go all the way through to the general election. Sometimes, though, like in the case of President Biden, Biden didn't really catch on until after the South Carolina primary, which was on Super Tuesday, which is pretty late in the calendar. But once Biden won South Carolina, he was off to the races in terms of the Democratic nomination. Damn, my little wiener's calling on me. She's being so sweet. She wants to see me. Come on, sweet. Um, Once President Biden had won South Carolina, he was really off to the races. Um, hang on, I don't know how we're going to do this. Um, Generally speaking, though, those candidates that get the most press carry the most momentum into their general elections. And once they get to the general, the slate is sort of wiped clean, and you get to focus just on the difference between two candidates versus an entire slate of Democratic and Republican candidates. Um, and then candidates in social media. Barack Obama did it best. Started really hammering down social media in its infancy in 2008. Um, they relay messages this way. They can conduct town halls through Facebook Live. They can basically skip the media chop houses and go straight to the voters and talk to them that way. And the voters can do the same with the candidates, interacting with them more directly. Um, there are websites and pages and donation buttons and volunteering and Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. YouTube allows candidates really to sell their messages in video format and allows them to uh, really hammer home their message to their constituencies and to um, the people that need to hear those messages in order to get them elected. This is a new campaign strategy. Obama, like I said, Obama did it first. Trump, Trump used social media, but he tried to use it as a way to run government, and this is not the way government's run. And I don't say that because I don't like Trump. I say that because he announced like a transgender ban in the military over Twitter, and the Joint Chiefs of Staff didn't know anything about it. The Pentagon didn't know anything about it. That's just not how government works. And when presidents speak, people listen. And when you have that kind of power, there's a responsibility that comes along with it as well. And when you abuse that power, you can get into danger fairly quickly if you're not careful with that responsibility. So that's your lecture on the media. I will see you when we talk about political parties.